why don't we get started? I'd like to welcome our panelists, Jeanne Martinet and PJ O'Rourke. You guys can clock in. There's Jeanne, and there's PJ. And I'm delighted that we have them joining us on, again, a timely and topic that's really should be of interest to everybody in America. Of how do we restore civil discourse in a time where it seems like we've had a paucity of it for some time. By way of introduction, Jeanne Martinet is a UVA grad, New York bon vivant, lady about town, and the best-selling author of The Art of Mingling, which has been translated into a number of languages, and other books on surviving and thriving in social situations. Jeanne has also written for publications like the New York Times and OZY magazine, and has shared her mingling know-how on numerous TV and radio shows over the last 25 years. The New York Times said of Jeanne that she believes in mingling the way some people believe in yoga. To her, it is a discipline and to be practiced on a regular basis. Welcome, Jeanne.
Hi.
PJ O'Rourke, maybe both of these people may be known to you already, but PJ is the H.L. Mencken Research Fellow at the Cato Institute, a regular panelist on NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. I try to do my my errands on Saturday mornings at 11 a.m. so I can listen in, by the way. And editor-in-chief of the web magazine American Consequences. The author of 19 books. These include The Parliament of Horrors and Give War a Chance, which both reached #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and Modern Manners, an etiquette guide for rude people, which sadly may be more applicable recently than in prior times. His most recent book is A Cry from the Far Middle, Dispatches from a Divided Land. When we left out, Jeanne, go back, that Jeanne's most recent book is Mingling with the Enemy. So they both have new, very topical books out. And in this panel, we'll talk about the causes, nature, and hopefully solutions for the divide, for uncivil discourse, and hopefully focus on the last, solutions. So for you who are out there, you can type in questions in your chat box. You're probably familiar with Zoom by now. And we'll leap in. You know, the causes of division and discord, I mean, spent a lot of time on this, but this is nothing new. You know, we have Mr. Jefferson behind me here. The Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans weren't very nice to each other in the early days. The Civil War, Vietnam leaped to mind as much worse times. And so this is nothing new, and it's nothing catastrophic, I would say. You know, nor is fake news. You know, they used to do ad hominem broadsheets in the early days, and political propaganda, particularly when it was harder to fact check with Google back then, and the yellow press of the late 19th to early 20th century. So I guess I'll put it to the panel. Why does it seem worse now? Maybe we have a lack of people have a lack of historical context, but why does it seem worse now?
Jeanne, you go first.
Okay. You know, my feeling is that while there has always been a divide, certainly in America, that the internet and social media have made this much worse than it could ever be before. You can't underestimate the effect of a 24/7 news cycle. We've never had that before, you know, 20, 30 years ago, whatever. And the what I call anti-social media it's designed for increasing tribalism. I mean, you have the narcissistic bubble wherein, whatever you believe is reflected back to you, not just, it's immediate and enlarged, because of the internet. And you also have anonymity, so people can post things without, hiding behind their little icons, and they don't have to be human. You have, and the internet, it forces people to skate on the surface of things. So we're like tweeting, and everybody is thinking in sound bites, so that increases it makes a lack of desire to talk about the issues in any nuanced kind of way, because we're used to just doing things so quickly. And also there's no vetting. I mean, I know that's partially has always been, but when Joe's blog carries the same weight in someone's mind as the Wall Street Journal, because it's retweeted 20,000 times on Twitter, that really, it's all exponentially worse because of the internet. That's what I think.
Boy, I couldn't agree more. Talk about civil agreement. I'm in total civil agreement with you. I mean, whose bright idea was it to put every idiot in the world in touch with every other idiot? I detest the internet, but I also think we have a couple other things going on that social media exacerbates. Anytime that there is a major economic shift underway, it's highly dislocating to society. It really disturbs things fundamentally. Think the Industrial Revolution. I mean, how it just turns everything in society topsy-turvy and brings all sorts of values into question, and people are suddenly moving around. They're in unfamiliar circumstances. They're around strangers. Everything is at sixes and sevens during a major economic change. And we're in the midst of a major economic change. We're in the midst of the digital revolution. And so that's one factor. And the other factor is anytime there's a major social change that goes on in society, whether it's the Protestant Reformation, whether it is, the equal rights for women, equal rights for Blacks and people of, Native Americans did not become citizens of this country until the 1920s. Anyway, anytime there's a major social change going on, change in sexual mores in the 1920s and so on, you also get people get deeply confused, and in their confusion, they get angry and weirded out. And so we're also in the midst of a big social change going on right now. There is like an entirely new attitude toward ethnicity, toward sexual orientation, toward gender identification, you name it, it's in the midst of change. And so when you have like two major changes like this going on at the same time, and interjected into the middle of this is a new, really stupid method of communication that gives everybody a bullhorn and denies anyone a pulpit, it's going to be a mess.
But you can actually go back the roots of it, and in some ways that go back because the consolidation of the newspaper industry. There's virtually not a major city in America that can support two newspapers other than New York. So there was a narrowing of points of view. You had the elimination of the fairness doctrine, where television, your local television station, those of us who are old enough to remember that, they would have present editorials and say, this is not necessarily the point of view of the station, but you had to present another side. And what's happened is that, as the consolidation of media, print media, and it's sort of falling away. And then you have instead of 3 networks, you have 572 channels, you have narrowcasting. So you can enables people to make sure the message is tailored to people who are already convinced of that point of view.
Right. And there's something else going on as well, that, in the beginning we had what was called shock jocks, and that's really become the shock jocks, which were basically people who would be sexually explicit or whatever, have now turned into outrage jocks. People like, I'm sorry, but people like Rush Limbaugh and the like have really fomented hate and the negative aspects of our psyche. And I realize that's a partisan thing to say, but that's how I see it. It's, I think that has not helped matters at all.
Taking up that partisan thread, I'm a Republican. So I'm driving across the middle of nowhere someplace, and the only thing I can get is AM radio. It's somewhere out in the Midwest. And the only thing that's on AM radio that I can get on my car radio is Rush Limbaugh. I was not a big Rush Limbaugh listener, but I'm listening to Rush Limbaugh, and the man could be funny, and he was good on radio. He was not untalented at his task. But I'm listening to him for a little while. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with him, but I realize he's shouting at me. Now, why is he shouting at me? I kind of agree with him. I can't remember. It was during one of the presidential elections. He's talking about some lame candidate. And he's saying, this is somebody's sock puppet. And they were, and
regardless of which side they were on, right?
Somebody's sock puppet. But the thing is, he's yelling, and I'm thinking, Rush, nobody listens to you at all who doesn't agree with you, unless they decide that their blood pressure needs to go up, or they are incredibly bored during a drive through a very flat place in the Midwest, or they can only get AM radio like me. But even I agree with you on this particular issue. You're shouting at me. Why are you shouting? And I never listened to Rush again. I hadn't a lot before, but just the shouting irked me.
Yeah.
And I agree, with Jeanne, that and it sounds like we're in violent agreement that the technology and social media have exacerbated this issue. The scale is overwhelming. Jeanne, you told us the other day, 1 in 5 humans on the planet interact with Facebook every day.
Yeah, I mean, and also I have in my book, I have other statistics about how many hours per day. And in one study that was about Facebook, they had to actually pay people in order for them to stay off Facebook for the study. I mean, it's an extremely addictive medium.
I don't get it myself. I've never used it. I've never looked at it. I've always thought, if I wanted to stay in touch with that person from high school, I could have stayed in touch with that person from high school. It's not like I moved to the moon. There was the telephone, there were letters and postcards. There were indeed every year high school reunions, which I never went to because there were a bunch of people in my high school I never wanted to see again. Why on earth would I use something like Facebook? I suppose if you have too many grandchildren or too many puppies or something, I can imagine some sort of use for it. But I don't get it.
Well,
I don't either. As a mingler, as a person who loves face-to-face socializing, I suspected at the beginning that it was first because people just found it easier, to not have to go to the party. But I think it's more complicated than that. So,
well, we have all these channels now on Instagram, not to hammer Mark Zuckerberg, although he does know what you're doing right now.
Billionaire in his underwear. Come on, guy. You're one of the 3 richest people on the face of the earth, and you can't find a collared shirt. You look like your mother dressed you. You look like you're 9.
I agree with you that rich people should have to dress like the rich guy in Monopoly, because then that's kind of unpleasant, and it'll rein in their.
I have a whole theory about that. That one of the reasons that people are so resentful about the ultra rich today is that it used to look so uncomfortable to be rich. You had to wear these special clothes all the time. I mean, even if you were supposedly enjoying yourself, you couldn't show up at the yacht race in +4s and a tam o' shanter. You couldn't show up in the golf course in your yachting cap and blazer and stuff. So even when they were having fun, they had to get all dressed up, and wear neckties and a boiled shirt and so on. They didn't eat dinner until 8 o'clock at night. I mean, you're starving, and even then, strange things, turtle soup. What's that going to taste like? It's going to taste like boiled turtle, isn't it? I mean, yuck. And so, people didn't really resent rich people in the same way. they sort of looked at it and, well, if that's their idea of fun, okay. But we'll bust out the beer barrel and have a polka,
Well, and now with all these channels, Jeanne, you quoted Mark Twain, which is typically a good idea, and said
I do that whenever I can.
Well, I mean, you could pass for an educated person in Western society if you know Mark Twain, Oscar Wilde, and Groucho Marx, I always say. But there are so many channels of communication, but there's less intimacy. I mean, Twain said, let us make a special effort to stop communicating with each other so that we can have some real conversation. And I think that's brilliant,
I would say, trying to have a political debate on the internet is like trying to build a sandcastle in a hurricane. Yeah. Or trying to dance a waltz with snow boots on. I mean, it's just a ridiculous idea. I mean, not all communication, but certainly any serious debate to try and have it online is just a big mistake.
Well, one of the things I think that not to harp entirely on social media, but why not? I mean, it's got it coming. Is that it trivializes leadership, just as your point to Joe's blog and the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. They all carry the same weight. But it's one of the things I was thinking about, like during the very heated partisan debates, which we have been subjected to unrelentingly for the past half a decade or more. Where is today's William F. Buckley of conservatism? Where is today's John Kenneth Galbraith of liberalism? Where's the Republican Ronald Reagan? Where's the Democratic Tip O'Neill? Where's the Milton Friedman arguing in favor of free markets? And where's the John Maynard Keynes arguing, about free markets' harms and dangers? And especially to give a perfect example is where is today's Martin Luther King Jr., making protests peaceful and dignified and powerfully effective,
Well, Marshall McLuhan famously said, the medium is the message, and notwithstanding Twitter's doubling the number of characters you could use to 280, I don't think that really lends itself to nuanced discourse, or the ability to have a Saul on the road to Tarsus moment of, oh, I'm convinced of the other person's point of view.
Yeah, I have another theory that's all because of the fact that they use sports analogy when they talk about politics, which immediately puts us into two teams and one's going to win and one's going to lose. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, division is really good for business. That's the other thing. It really, the more riled up everybody gets, I don't, I can't talk about it in complex terms, but I know that to be true, that a lot of people like the divide.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it sells hot dogs, I mean, there's no doubt about it. And not only is this divide, do people prey upon it in a mercenary way, both in terms of money. And I was thinking about Donald Trump, the elephant that's not in the room.
Thank God.
Thank God. So I was thinking, given the situation that we have been in, say, in the past decade, and the means by which we were communicating and the various changes and disturbances in society and economics, some fool would have arisen in his place. Had there never been a Donald Trump, there would have been a Donald Trump. In fact, I've seen this kind of cheap populism. You can see it over on the left as well as you can see it on the right. Some fool would have risen. It might have been a fool from a different part of the political spectrum, but something equally narcissistic and foolish would have arisen had we not had Trump.
It's true. I mean, he was very good at increasing the polarization, though, I have to say. It's almost hard to imagine anybody that could exacerbate the divide as much as Trump.
Well, I'm reminded, if you look at the populists, so-called, in lots of the Western democracies, there and Bolsonaro in Brazil and what's his name in Hungary. I mean, he's not alone. And I'm reminded.
No, but
reminded.
It's very interesting to me though. The nature of populism is something fundamentally wrong with it. And these days, seems to tend to rise on the right-wing side of the political spectrum. But if we go back 100 and some years, the populists of the late 19th century, William Jennings Bryan, notably, were on the left in many ways, although they also had a bunch of abhorrent racist opinions and were tacit, if not explicit, proponents of Jim Crow laws and so on. They were nonetheless, they fancied themselves to be of the people. And, and of course, one of the nice things about them, one of the things you can say in their favor and a lesson we can learn today, they went away. They disappeared. They had their little moment in the sun. William Jennings Bryan, Cross of Gold. I mean, basically it's not too far off from some things we've been hearing lately from some other people, is that basically he wanted the government to print a whole bunch more money so that everybody would have a whole bunch more money. Oh, I wish that kind of thing worked, but of course it doesn't. Anyway, what he wound up in the 1920s as the prosecutor in the Scopes monkey trial. He ended up prosecuting the monkey over the question of whether Darwin could be taught in the Tennessee public schools. And I want to like fate for Donald Trump.
Yes, well said.
This is important because real discourse, civil dialogue over differences is important to getting things done and having it. And it isn't all just politics. Jeanne, you quoted the great Bulwer Lytton, who gave us the pen is mightier than the sword, and it was a dark and stormy night, who said, the true spirit of conversation consists in building on another man's observation, not overturning it. So you engage without necessarily hoping to radicalize or convert people. I ask you both, just each share one anecdote, if sort of funny stories of the incivility or craziness that you've personally experienced. That would be good.
What comes to mind is one time while it was during the time when I was working on this book, and I was at a bar somewhere, can't remember. I think it might have been in Rehoboth Beach, and I started talking to a fellow, and it turned out before I'd spoken to him too long that he was a flat earther. He believed that the earth was flat. And at first I thought he was kidding. And I only since then I came home, and immediately after that I did research and realized that this is actually like 2% of America or something incredible, like believes the world is flat. But anyway, at the time, he just started trying to convince me that with all his proof that the earth was really flat. And I used one of my mingling techniques, I admit, to get away from him. I used the shake and break. I just put my hand out and I said, it's been so nice talking to you. And when you put your hand out, people do grab it. They have to take it. And then you shake it, and I was gone. But that is when I realized, wow, that's the most extreme divide I can imagine. Someone like me who believes the earth is round versus the earth is flat. And it just goes to prove that my other point, which is that, not all two sides of an issue are equal. You can't say, well, let's give the flat earther equal time, So anyway.
Yeah, it's probably just as well the fairness doctrine went out the window on that question. I really don't want to have to listen to the flat earthers. Well, my irritation or whatever it was, or confrontation was this was, I periodically, as Carrie mentioned, I'm sometimes on the panel for Wait, Don't Tell Me. And so I make my periodic visits to NPR land, where everybody, wears clogs and is vegan. It's a different world for me. And I was getting a lot of blowback from my little coterie of friends out there who are quite liberal about Trump because I'm a Republican, even though they knew that I hadn't voted for Trump. I actually announced on NPR, on Wait, Don't Tell Me, that I was going to, and I did, vote for Hillary Clinton. And I said, I know, Dorothy's house fell on her, but I'm still going to vote for Hillary Clinton, because I just can't. The idea of having this guy as commander in chief is a really bad idea, which I think proved out to be true. But nonetheless, I was getting this blowback from all the NPR people about, Trump, my Trump, you're a Republican, this is, and I said, look, finally, I said, look, you don't like Trump, I don't like Trump. But for you, Trump is a neighbor's dog pooping on your lawn, okay? But I'm a Republican. This is my dog in my house pooping on my rug. You cannot possibly detest this man more than I do. So that worked out okay.
Well, I'll just share a quick one, and it may actually lead to a question that's been posted about for Jeanne about how she came to write this book. But I was invited to dinner by a certain female author of books on social discourse, who shall be nameless, but is present. And so anyway, I've done Jeanne a favor and said, well, I'll take you to dinner. So we go to dinner. It was right after the election.
It was right before the election.
Right before the election, pardon me. And so what are you going to do? I said, well, I just, from a policy perspective, I don't like the guy, but from a policy perspective, said, I'm not paying for your dinner. We're going Dutch. I'm sorry, I don't want to offend our people in Amsterdam. We're splitting the bill. And we had a lovely dinner and laughed it up, yucked it up, which is a great example of you can be of disparate views and still be engage in humor and deflection and come to a common ground. And Jeanne, that's kind of a segue for you as to kind of solutions and techniques for how do you do that? And we've had questions of, well, if you know somebody, well, how do you recognize when you're in a dinner party or a cocktail party? By the way, those will happen again for those of you out there who haven't been to one in a while. This is good prep for you. This is
I think we're seeing
training, So
I think we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel for us gathering sometime in the not too distant future. But one of the things that I always like to do that I describe in my book is to test for friend, foe, or fanatic. The point being that you don't really want to talk politics with somebody who's a fanatic. I say I would rather talk to a foe. That's somebody who's on the opposite side, but who's not angry, not going to be insane, rather than a fanatic on either side, which is just unpleasant. So although it's a little bit easier when they're on your side, but not that much. So there are test questions that I like to use. And one of them is, just as an example, is to say, did you read the New York Times today? Now, if you're with somebody who's a fanatic on the other side, they will say, I never read that rag, or that's fake news. And at that point, you've got a clue as to now you know that you're going to stay away from certain subjects because you're at whatever social gathering you're not there to have an argument. You know that when you go to social things, you're not going to change people's minds. So you have to always have that in, what's the use of having a debate, unless you're in town hall meeting. So that's one of my things, is to test for fanaticism.
And sometimes that test can have very positive results. I mean, I found when I was covering When I was covering the New Hampshire primary, which I do every time we have a New Hampshire, every 4 years, because I live in New Hampshire. And so that's easy, I don't have to be one of the boys on the bus, I can walk to most of, I can just hang around downtown Peterborough, New Hampshire, the closest town to which I live. And every candidate comes through, the interesting thing about Peterborough is that every single person in Peterborough has met every single presidential candidate since like the Kennedy-Nixon election. And so conversations about politicians can be like, he has a posture, or did you see what she ordered at the diner? I couldn't, it's very personal. Anyway, so I'm out covering this, and naturally you run across plenty of nutcases. So I'm at a Trump rally, and there's a guy there that I start talking to. And I just kind of take to him, and he's got a Trump button on and so on. So, we're talking, and he seems, I can't tell whether he's a faux or fanatic, whether he disagrees with me. I mean, I'm there as a reporter, so it's not really the point, but I started to feel a sort of personal connection with this guy. And I can't really tell whether he's faux or fanatic. And so I asked him, I said, well, what do you think about Trump personally? I mean, as a person, as opposed to, why you're voting for him or why you're at this rally. And he said, well, I think he's got a screw loose. I said, but you're supporting him. And he said, yeah. I said, would you invite him to your house? You want him to meet your family? He said, no, I think there's something a little off about the guy. No, thanks. I wouldn't want him in the house. I said, but you're voting for him. And he said, look, I'm a mechanic. I got a garage, towing business, body shop, and we're doing really well. It's a good business. We've had the business for a long time. And he said, and I am just going nuts. He said, I give the people who work for me, I give them a good health care package. I don't mind Obamacare. I can afford Obamacare. But every time somebody gets a bright idea down in Washington, a pile of paper the size of the old Boston phone book lands on my desk, because I don't have a human resources department. I don't have a legal department. It's just me and my wife run this business, and I'm a mechanic. I mean, and he said, I got gas tanks here at the gas station that they're 25 years old. They need to be replaced. I can't get the local permit. I can't get the state permit. I can't get the federal permit to dig these things up. I can't get the state, federal, or local permit to put in new tanks. I got a junkyard out back. It's been a junkyard since 1925. Now I got an endangered newt swimming around in the water in the snow tires. And he said, I'm just, I'm at wit's end, So I said to him, I see your point. But how does sending a maniac to the White House fix this? And he says, well, it's what they got coming. So I marked him down as neither foe nor fanatic, but actual friend.
Well, I'd be curious to know whether or not that actually, whether all his paperwork problems got better in the last 4 years, but
I doubt it. And then I'd also be curious to find, I really would like to look the guy up and find out what he did in round 2, whether he was still.
Well, I mean, the other thing is just reminding me that I think maybe this is off topic, but I really think that we've lost the appreciation for small talk. When did that happen? We all think we have to talk about the issues, the big issues of the day, when really the best mingling I've ever done is when suddenly you start talking about something that's a small detail or minutia, and it blossom, you play with it and you go back and forth, and you create this thing. It's like the art of conversation that people used to have. Nobody used to talk about politics all the time. I don't think 150 years ago. I mean, I think that people just I don't know where that went. That small talk is underrated.
We're very, go ahead, Kerry.
I was going to say, in our parents' era, it was considered impolite to talk about religion or politics at a party. I don't know when that. Then
it became mandatory.
Yeah, and so
sex, religion, and politics.
Yeah, well, that's the 70s for the
combo,
first topic. Yeah. but it has changed, and I agree with you, Jeanne, that there is a salutary effect to small talk, because it isn't all about politics. It's about human social intercourse. It's about getting to know somebody, and through small things you can avoid the misreading where we make assumptions, and that's baked into us.
And also, it's like you want to be curious about the person, not about their beliefs. Like, who are they? Where they come from? What do they like? I don't know. We need to retrain people, because curiosity in other people is what we really need.
Well, I find myself very fortunate in this respect, in living out in the country in a place with a terrible climate is good for small talk. We still have the weather and the crops discussions up here, in a way that most of urban and suburban America does not. And it's great. Not a week goes by that a tree doesn't topple over on somebody's car, or that the river doesn't flood, or that the snow doesn't cave a roof in. And it keeps people quite busy discussing these matters.
How, Jeanne, you talk about in your book some of the real techniques, which are not all deflection and all humor, but it's active listening, it's being in the moment, akin to the Buddhist concept of mindfulness. Talk about that, because so many people, we're having two discussions, and we're okay, I'm listening, but I'm also framing the clever riposte or the rebuttal, and we got to hit the self-mute button on those.
I know it's very tricky, because you can't completely turn off the what you want to say next, because that is forming as people are talking, and that's how the back and forth happens. But for the most part, we don't know how to, most of us don't know how to listen as well as we should. Really listen and try to. The other thing I say is try to you have to know your own triggers, because that's where the mute, not beyond mute, that's where your own noise comes in and knocks out what the other person's saying. When you know that your triggers, you have certain triggers that if somebody's going to mention something, because of your past discussions with whoever, or something you've read online, so it's good to prepare and understand where those are. I know that sounds like overly analytical, but it really does help. And the other thing is to sometimes, in order to get to the empathy that you need, empathy, of course, is key. But sometimes if I find myself losing it because I'm in a room full of opposite party people, it doesn't happen very often, but I try and pretend that they're all 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds. You just see them all as 4-year-olds, like fussy 4-year-olds, because basically that's a trick to make us all understand that, to remind yourself that we're all humans, that we're all basically at heart, that's who we are. And, other than that, there are all kinds of techniques for after you get into a fight. But I think that's the beginning part, is to try to really just open, release, be in the present.
Also, you suggest, Jeanne, being a little bit of an anthropologist, because everybody is an interesting case. Your flat earth guy, I'm sort of interested. I don't really want to meet him, and I don't really want to talk to him, but I sort of am interested in how he got to be a flat earth guy. Did he grow up in a flat earth family? Did he go to a flat earth school? What?
Yeah, I probably, that's a really good point. I think the guy, if he hadn't been sort of obnoxious in other ways, I might not have done the shake and break on him. But that is the reason I came home and then started doing research on the Flat Earth Society, because I was curious about the whole deal. But yes, it's important. And I practice what I do, what I say, don't do what I do. I'm not always, I admit, able to do what I say in my book. That's what my goal is. And that is because sometimes my own triggers happen, but I do, that's what we should be aiming for, is to try to always be interested in where the other person's coming from. Especially not to, Martin Luther King, I don't want to misquote him, but he said something like, you have very little morally persuasive power if you show your contempt, or something like that.
That's very
Um,
much what he said. Yeah.
and, you know, so that's the most important thing, is to not immediately go into your sense of superiority, even if you are absolutely sure that you're, you know, I didn't actually do that with the flat earther guy. I could have just been like, well, you're an idiot, but at least I didn't do that.
How do you reach that common ground with somebody, Jeanne and PJ, when you know that you're on opposite sides and you're not, and you've let go of the notion that you're going to convince them, and then perhaps they get really mad on top of it? How do you deal with that?
I don't know. You want to, I have lots of techniques for this, but I don't want to take over, but I like
Sure.
to, do what I call sidestepping, which is to, when you see somebody getting really angry, especially if you're stuck at a dinner party where you can't actually physically move, you sidestep to the issue that's close. So let's say you're talking to somebody who doesn't believe that global warming is at all caused by men and is very adamant about that. You know, rather than argue that point, because you're not going to get anywhere, I remember one conversation where I said, well, I guess the aliens are going to have to come and save us then. I tried to like change the subject in a funny way. And then in this particular case, the guy said, well, studies have shown there are no aliens. There's no life on other planets. That's been proven. So then I had to sidestep again and say, well, at least we can agree that all of the stories of alien abductions are, you know, totally false. And then, you know, we can go on like that. So sometimes it takes a while to get to it.
Yeah, and then I mean, you know, it's again. I'm glad we've got the crops and the weather up here, and like you know, debates about whether we have wolves and mountain lions, which some people firmly believe we do, and you can have quite a discussion about that without anybody getting really angry. You know?
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Till the wolf or the mountain lion shows up. But another way, for instance, on the climate change is you can go big on that sometimes. Well, you know, you may not believe that this is human caused climate change, but we have had some pretty dramatic episodes of climate change in the history of the Earth. And so what do you think would happen? Let's assume that the climate is warming. Leaving cause out of it. What's your guess? What should we do about it? Or is there anything we can do about it? Or what's your bigger view on this? Taking things to a larger scale, either going down to how's your dog, or going up to,
Right.
you know, wither the universe, can diffuse the personal nature of these things.
Right. And sometimes deciding which way to go will depend on the personality of who you're talking to.
Yeah.
The other thing I sometimes like to use is what I call conversational camouflaging, which is where you actually go undercover for a little bit and you pretend to be on their side. So someone will say, well, let's take the same thing as the global warming. Say, yeah, you're probably right. And then a couple sentences later, you say, but on the other hand, I have read these studies that show blah, blah, blah. So you disarm the person by pretending to be on their side at first, and then they relax. And then the idea is that you gently bring them along then into your area. That's sometimes hard to finesse, but.
Or, you know, there's a difference. You and I were talking about this the other day. There's a difference between people with really noxious and harmless views and people with just nutty views, you know.
True.
I mean, if somebody's nuttiness is limited to not believing that the moon landing happened, you know, but limited to, you know, unfortunately, that often goes with a lot of other ideas, you know, so cause actual harm to actual people. But as long as, you know, no animals were harmed during this, you know, making this movie, I'm perfectly fine with going along with it. You know what? Yeah, really?
Right. What makes you think that? Right. Absolutely.
Because actually, when I was covering when I was a foreign correspondent, I was covering the Gulf War in 1991. The U.S. military flew us out to the front line on the border between Saudi Arabia and Iraq. And when we landed this godforsaken place, hundreds of miles up that borderline, it really did look like the moon. I mean, it honestly did. I mean, if they faked the moon landing, I know where they did it. I've been there. So if I have the moon landing was fake nut on my hands, I can tell that anecdote.
How about balancing the, you'll meet intransigent people, and it's not, it doesn't have to be politics. It can be, any host of trigger issues. And sometimes people just are just like to take a contrary point of view. I mean, how do you help balance when people can't balance for themselves the need to be right all the time? It overwhelms their need to be happy.
I mean, first of all, that sounds like a therapy. They need that's a big question for the person. But I mean, in the smaller, if you're having a conversation with somebody, the humor is always a good way to go when you're with somebody who is absolutely, bent on being right and proving his point or whatever. You can always diffuse and deflect with a lot of different techniques. Most of them are about humor. I always like to, if I see two people going at it, like really, if I'm hosting a party and I see two people going at it and they're both like just screaming at each other about some issue, I will throw myself upon my sword, and tell an ouch joke. So like, opponents shouldn't throw dirt on each other because all you do is lose ground.
That kind of thing that's known as dad humor.
Yeah, right. I mean, and like, so again, you really have to be willing to give up your ego for that.
Yeah. Cemetery is the most popular place in town. People are dying to get in there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell a dumb joke, whatever.
Or as Mark Twain said, trying to convince people the other point of view, akin to it is never tried to teach a pig to sing. It's a waste of your time and it just annoys the pig. So, conversion is difficult. Any examples of where you've made assumptions about people? You're reading the room, or you're having an initial conversation, and then as you exfoliate, so to speak, you're perplexed at what you find. We've made wrong assumptions and then sort of change course as you're going along.
Well, I was on jury duty once, and I was talking to a very lovely woman who lived on the Upper West Side, as I do, and we were connecting, and I thought, wow, this person's great, and she could be my friend maybe. And then I was embarrassed about my own. Because then when we went to the voir dire, the judge was asking what we all were reading. That was part of the actual voir dire for this case. She wanted to know what publications we read and what TV stations we watched. And this woman who I'd been talking to was next to me, and she was like, Fox News, Breitbart, what is it? Breitbart News, and I was like, yikes. But it was interesting. It was instructive to me because I thought, okay, I don't approve of, that's not anything I would read. And it does tell me something about her. But on the other hand, I had a conversation with her. We made a connection. That's not to be dismissed.
You had a genuine connection already.
Right. So in that, I mean, if I had heard the voir dire first, I wouldn't have talked to her, probably. I mean, I'm just admitting my own prejudices.
People can be,
those assumption things get baked in. I mean, I had my 10-year-old, we were who's now 19, but we were in a parking lot and we saw a Prius, and some of these get baked in early. And so this was 2012, 9 years ago, and it had a Romney sticker on it. And Liam, my 10-year-old, said, I guess he's pretty observant, he said, Dad, I thought those Priuses came from the dealer with an Obama sticker as standard equipment. Which I thought was hilarious. But, and you have to sort of step back and say, don't make assumptions. And as one of the call-in or the write-in people said, I want to learn about the stuff that'll be on somebody's obituary, the interesting stuff, not how did they feel about, gun rights or any of that stuff.
People have surprising range of views. It's often tempting to pigeonhole somebody, because they watch Fox News or something. You assume that their opinions are all of a piece, and that's not necessarily the case. For instance, I'm a gun owner. I enjoy target shooting. And I've got a good friend who's a retired policeman, as indeed my father-in-law was a career FBI agent, and he had the same set of views too. That you would expect people who are enthusiastic about firearms to be very unenthusiastic about gun control, but that's not necessarily the case with policemen. It can change your point of view on gun control if you've had guns pulled on you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love the one assumptions that happened to a friend of mine, and he got chatting on an airplane with a woman who said, well, I'm an accountant. And so he said, well, okay, so you're going to be a conservative person. And they continued the discussion and said, well, what do you do when you're not, auditing firms? Said, well, I like to go skydiving. Suddenly, whoa, 180, here's a total risk taker. And then they got talking more and said, well, where do you do it? And so on. Said, but I always pack my own parachute. Okay, another 90-degree turn. And here's somebody who's taking measured risks, right? And then they got on a little farther and said, and I got thinking about it and realized that, pilot, something could happen. They could have a heart attack or something. So I got my pilot's license as well. So if anything happened to the pilot, I could take the controls a la James Bond, and fly the plane. So it went from, complete conservative approach to total risk taker to measured risk taker to a little OCD on this, but with the skydiving thrown in. So, you really have to explore a little bit.
It's true. I mean, and on the other side, though, we don't want to assume that's a basic tenet, but for the purpose of mingling, if you walk into a room and every single person there is wearing a Brooks Brothers suit and there are pictures of horses on the wall, you might want to, not start off talking about
Bernie.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, you do.
We're Burning Man.
There is a certain way of reading the room, and that doesn't mean that you should not have your opinions at all. But as far as like my goal is for social happiness, so reading the room is not a bad thing.
And Jeanne, I like your, about sometimes you just, you have a lot of techniques about deflection, humor, changing the subject, avoiding the trigger topics, avoiding assumptions, really engaging in a meaningful and mindful way. What do you do when you're ready to wave the white flag in a social situation? You both have been in that. I'd be interested to hear.
Well, I mean, other than mostly if I'm at a point where I'm with somebody you mean somebody who's really angry and has gone off. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Or they're incapable of genuine engagement. I mean, both.
I have escape techniques. This is what I do. I mean, I have escape techniques. My favorite one, which has also been I've shared it in other books, but is the human sacrifice, which is It sounds awful, but people do it all the time. You basically find someone out of the corner of your eye. You can only do this at a cocktail party, but when you find somebody who's walking by, you bring them in and you introduce them to the person. As soon as they say hello, you're out. And and I have a whole bunch of escape techniques for that, because there's nothing else to do at that point but to actually leave the person physically. Now, if you're at a dinner party, hopefully there's somebody on the other side of you. And because that's a little more difficult.
You can always spill the soup into your lap too.
That's right. That's in an emergency situation.
Right. You can, but one doesn't want to disengage too readily, because of something a lobbyist friend of mine in Washington once said to me. He said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Ah,
So,
good one.
That is always to be recalled.
And
I like that.
And Jeanne, just says in her book, always go to the party. And this is, sort of the same thing, PJ, of be engaged, and even if it's difficult, right? And
right. When I started writing this book, a lot of people, my friends, said to me, I don't get this. Why are you writing this book? I'm not socializing with people on the other side. Like I never see those people at parties. And I was like, this is like part of the problem. Like what, that's not acceptable. Not that I don't think that too many people would actually stay home on purpose, but it's the tribalism is only going to make things worse, so you have to cross over as much as you can. If there's any enjoyment at all, if there's smoked salmon and gin, right, you go to the party.
Well, that's another advantage of living way out in the country. You simply don't, it's like your grade school class. You are just with the people you're with. I mean, you don't get to pick when you live in the town with, our town had I think when our youngest kid was born, the population went from 349 to 350. And so there they are, and you just have to learn to live with that, in a way that if you're in an urban or even suburban environment, you can say things like, well, I'm not socializing with people like that. Up here, you're socializing with everybody.
Yeah.
Or nobody.
Yeah, but PJ, most, the vast majority of Americans don't live in Grover's Corners,
Well, I suppose that's true, but actually, people live in smaller communities than they think. That's a well-known saying that Washington's a very small town, and honestly, when I lived 15 years in New York, and I never once walked the length of 57th Street without bumping into somebody I knew. Our communities are smaller than we often recognize, and they do include people who disagree with us, no matter how much we may try and avoid that.
No, that is absolutely true. Besides which, before the 2016 election, I was at dinner parties where the arguments between Hillary and Bernie were every bit as vitriolic as any Republican and Democrat argument I ever saw. I mean, it was like, oh wait, it was like two parties at that point.
And then, Jeanne, in your book, again, not that you're, I don't see the crystals there in your apartment, so you're not like a new ager or anything, but but you do touch on some really important and deep concepts of mindfulness and of the importance of empathy. And I'd like you to expand on that a little bit.
Well, I have some crystals in my apartment. You just can't see them on this camera. The importance of understanding that we're all human beings is, as I think I said before, is a goal. That empathy is the key to it all. I mean, we have to. It's not. You don't have to believe what the other person believes in order to see them as a human and try to understand where they're coming from and how that that Trump was that made it was really challenging for me to do that with people who were supporting Trump, because to me it seemed so dark and so kind of hateful in so many ways.
Jeanne, you're going back to politics.
It was just an example, but I mean, it is true that that's our challenge, is to try to get to that empathetic place. There was a person who's, I mean, I'm not the first person to write about him. I think his name is, I hope I get it right, Daryl Davis, who is
I know Daryl. He's played music at my house.
Okay, yeah. So he's a Black
Great guy.
man who spent basically a lot of his life befriending white supremacists. And he's like the symbol of, the example of this. He had to sit for years and listen to them espouse hatred at him, but he just was patient. He gave them a floor. He kept listening until, like dozens of them, I think maybe as many as 30, quit the Ku Klux Klan, turned in their robes, and that's a supreme, example of empathy.
That's gone farther than I could go.
Yeah, well, me too. I couldn't do it.
He gets sainthood. I do not.
Right.
I actually.
He is by the way, he's a fabulous
little bit.
piano player. He is a fabulous piano player. Just look him up.
I actually favor sympathy a little bit more than I favor empathy. Sympathy is Christian charity, feeling of kindness. Empathy is getting into other people's heads, and I'm not sure I want to go there. Also, in my experience, some of the most empathetic people that I have encountered, Bill Clinton, were not necessarily very sympathetic characters. So I lean a little more towards sympathy than empathy. There's a subtle difference between the two.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Well, maybe it's time to open the floor and take some questions. And I'm gonna open it up. And it's from a cousin of mine who's a minister, and it's not nepotism if somebody actually has something to say. But Bill, if you're there, Bill asked, Descartes said, today would say, I post, therefore I am. Has thinking gone away and been replaced by reptilian brain reactions, such as we share with alligators? The immediacy of, poke somebody with a needle on Twitter or whatever, how do we deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, what my rule is to count to 10 hours. I think that the online thing is it's very difficult, but basically the immediacy is a problem. Just so wait, if there's anything that's not nice that you're saying online, wait until, sleep it off. And I also say, tweet unto others as you would like to be tweeted.
I think the short answer to your cousin's question is yes. Thinking has gone quite out of style. You absolutely have to suppress impulse control in order to think anything over carefully. One of the reasons that I spend most of my time writing rather than broadcasting or tweeting and so on is that I never know what I'm going to say, and I better think it over. And writing gives you a marvelous, wonderful chance to think twice about whether you should say something. I often go ahead and put my foot in it anyway, but still, at least you've been given the opportunity. Whereas I wouldn't trust myself on a Twitter account. Mercifully, I don't know how to use one.
Yeah, it's much better when you do the handwritten notes of the hostess and comment on the wonderful dinner guests rather than the absolute horror of a fallen souffle or whatever culinary disaster may have been part of. Humor remains the best social lubricant and often enhances a point of order. But when a difficult topic is on the table, should you still take the risk when striving to make a point? And I mean, doesn't real engagement in sometimes mean engaging on difficult stuff?
Well, I mean, I think we might differ on this, but my point is, if it's a social occasion, and you're not at a town hall meeting, or you're not trying to help enact, legislation, the debate should only be taken to a certain point, and when it gets ugly, then it should not be taken any further. That, unless, and I have an exception to that, if someone says something truly offensive, something that is incredibly racist, incredibly, the Holocaust was fake, or whatever, there's some level at which you can't live with yourself if you don't engage. And good luck with that. PJ, take it away.
Yeah, thank goodness those occasions don't arise as often as we sort of mentally picture them doing, or social gatherings would be absolutely impossible. Yeah, when you run up against somebody whose opinions are vicious, and I try to explain this to my kids, is that that there's a big difference between people who have just a bad opinion and people who have really harmful opinions. And just because you really, you always got to say to yourself, okay, so what did this person say? What this person said, was that like a course of action and organization that they are undertaking, and this is an active cause in which they're participating, in which case I had better get out of here and probably call the cops on them or something? Or was this just a brain fart and not really like causing, enough methane to enter the atmosphere to tip the balance in the climate change? Is this person just say something really stupid and tactless, or did they say something that was really vicious? And this is, because the kids, or the two younger kids, are still in these school situations where they've got these trigger warnings and safe spaces, and like practically anything can be construed as being offensive to somebody. They're pretty woke themselves, but they're living in an ultra woke environment, and where like everybody is like practicing taking offense. And I said, one of these days you're going to have to live in the real world and have a real job in an office with other people, some of whom you're not going to like and are going to have opinions different than you, and life's not college or prep school.
Yeah, self-righteousness has become our drug of choice.
Ooh,
yeah, it's gotten a little bit out of control.
But I still will. My go-to is always I'm afraid I always try to use a humorous line. Like I could say, I sometimes say, do you think this conversation is having a nervous breakdown?
Or is that bed sheet you're going to wear to the Klan rally tonight? Is that a fitted sheet? Is that a floral pattern?
Or we better stop arguing. People will think we're married.
A very good one. A very good one. I underlined that in your book, as a matter of fact.
Well, there is a difference between an obnoxious New England Patriots fan and the local KKK organizer. Let's agree on that, okay?
Right, and there's even a difference between an obnoxious New England Patriots fan and Bill Belichick.
Somebody wrote in that a great technique and would be, how about considering treating others as you would a foreign visitor that speaks really good English? You may be more polite, maybe more attentive to their answers, and more tolerant of their divergent views. I think that's a great idea.
It's excellent. That's what I mentioned that when I talked about being an anthropologist in my one section in my book, about how you basically have to see it as being traveling in a foreign country. And that will give you a better, your customs are different. People may speak differently, but if you were in a foreign country, you wouldn't immediately take offense. You'd be like, well, that's interesting that they do that here.
My dear old dad used to say, when my brothers and I were fighting, said, why don't you treat them as if they were a stranger and you just met them? So, um, you know, have you ever witnessed where guests at a dinner party, cocktail party, have actually changed the other person's mind in a conversation? You know, like, oh, you're right. I'm leaving the John Birch Society. I'm putting a Bernie sticker on my Prius or on my Cadillac. I don't know. You know.
Jeanne, have you ever?
I don't think so, but I have certainly I have witnessed people doing the, you know, what I call the Tai Chi form of yielding, you know, where people who are being super polite will fold, but I've never seen the change of opinion.
I've had it happen to me. I've had people change my opinion about things in a social setting. It wasn't at a cocktail party or a dinner party or anything, but you know, I was much more convinced about charter schools and you know, voucher programs before I talked to a person as a friend, but I don't see them. I only see them like once a year because they live way out on Long Island, and they come up here in the summer for a couple of weeks. So I see this guy every summer for a couple of weeks, and he's a school teacher in public school, and he was talking about the way that public schools would become dumping grounds for the alternative schooling only works if the alternative schools are non-selective. So for instance, the Catholic school, parochial schools don't really threaten the public system because the parochial schools want as many Catholic kids as possible to go to those parochial schools, even if the Catholic kids happen to be ill-behaved and stupid. It's okay. The
right.
nuns will fix that.
You and I resemble that remark.
Yeah. But you know, he was telling me about, you know, in some of the local towns and so on around him, and he had brought up the problem of the public schools as dumping grounds, which I don't know if it like completely changed my mind about charter schools and voucher systems, but it certainly gave me something to think about there.
Yeah, actually, I have to take back what I said, because as you're talking, I realized that my mind was completely changed on a subject of hunting. When I was younger, very much younger, I used to be completely against all hunting. I thought it was terrible. And then I sat down and for an evening with a man who was a goose hunter. You know, he didn't hunt deer, but he hunted mostly geese and ducks. And he convinced me by talking about, like, you know, eating what you kill and where does your chicken come from in the groceries. And, you know, my mind was completely changed by that. And I realized that some forms of hunting were totally okay.
My wife was pointed out that I'm an avid, I'm a bird hunter, mostly avid duck hunter for many years, and but anyway, I've got a hunting dog, and my wife was pointing out once that that dog must think that I am the best hunter ever, and I said, "What do you mean, dear? You don't even particularly like hunting." She said, "I go to I leave the house." And I come back with these dead cows, dead chickens, dead turkeys. And the hunting dog is going, how's she do that?
And they're in packages already.
Yeah, I go out with him and we're lucky if we get one, you know, and she comes back, you know, with half a dozen.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're going to not eat meat at all, how can you be against responsible hunting?
Yeah.
Well, all right. So here's one that everyone, good question, great question, because everyone who's listening or on this panel has encountered this. What's the advice for family gatherings when you know you're going to encounter people who make your skin crawl, who, you know,
who you're related to,
You know,
and you can't get
and
rid of
it doesn't have, it's usually not politics. You know, usually there's a good melange of annoying things when you're family.
Shall I go first?
Go
You
first.
please.
I have a whole chapter on this, obviously, in my book. And the first thing is to try to erase what happened last time. You want to start from zero, as much as possible. It's impossible to do it all the way, but to try to start fresh and not hold the conversation you had last Thanksgiving in your head. The other thing is this is difficult for some of us. Alcohol is not a salve, but an accelerant in these difficult situations. You might think, this is going to be so hard, I might as well drink heavily. That's not a good idea. Also, I recommend positive memory sharing instead of so if you immediately start conversation with talking about your childhood, something that was wonderful for both of you, for all of you, whatever, that's always just try and keep that in your mind, have some of those in your mind for when the situation gets difficult. And I also have it's also important not to, if you're going to talk politics, not to do it in the dinner table with everyone watching, but to try to at least get the person off by themselves. And my last point about family gatherings is the family pet. The family pet is so valuable in this situation because whenever things get tense, you call the pet over. Everyone loves the pet. You pet the dog, you feed the dog, you walk the dog, you love the dog. Carrie seems to have disappeared.
Carrie did disappear. I don't know where he went.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, he's back. Well, in our family, a certain number of beloved old relatives who tended to be sort of get on a single track and can't get off it. So my wife and I did, as soon as the kids were old enough to be instructed this way, is we would arm ourselves, my wife and I, and each of the three children, with a certain number of prearranged subject changers, and so that we would we would go into battle with this or that beloved, but sometimes exasperating relative, and so we would have, there's 5 of us, and we would have a minimum of 10 subject changers. Sometimes they'd have to kick a kid under the table, to make them remember. Oh, Aunt Edna, where did you get that scarf? That's such a beautiful scarf. Anyway, they were all 3 were primed, as my wife and I were. And so if you've got like 10 or 15 subject changers prearranged and a little signal to bring them into play, that can be helpful.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That's a good idea.
Well, I'm going to take 1 or 2 more here. We're coming up on our time shortly. PJ, this is, I guess this is for you, but it's actually from someone that Jeanne and I knew back at UVA, who now live in Grover's Corners, and they're left-wing atheists surrounded by dear, kind, wonderful religious zealots, and they know that they do not have, the locals know they don't have guns, so they're continually baiting them, getting advice when that they feel like they're the enemy in the minds of the locals. That's a tough one.
When your neighbors are worried that you don't have a gun. There may be something wandering around outside that the neighbors aren't telling you about if the neighbors are worried that you don't have a gun. Hey, look, it's better to be that the neighbors are worried that you don't have a gun than it is to have neighbors that are worried you do have a gun. So,
I guess.
They're just going to have to live with their virtue.
And anything that you guys would like that we haven't addressed? I mean, I'll actually kick off, and maybe as a entree to the final comments. But Jeanne, you quoted Arthur Brooks, former president of American Enterprise Institute, Harvard professor, and I just loved his observation, which you put in your book, that the single biggest way a subversive can change America is not by disagreeing less, but by disagreeing better, engaging in earnest debate while still treating everyone with love and respect. That just seems, he's taking a page from Mahatma Gandhi, I think there, but that's not a bad page to take.
Well, that sort of says it. How can I can't improve on the quote that I put at the end of my book, so.
Well, Arthur's a great guy. I've known him since he took over at AEI. And what people often don't understand about Arthur is that he's very politically conservative. American Enterprise Institute is a quite conservative, pro-free enterprise organization. And so Arthur is also, he and his wife are vegans. And so he had printed, he had to have them made up specially. They weren't available in stores, bumper stickers for when George W. Bush was running. It was Vegans for Bush bumper sticker that he put on his car. So and it loops us back to Kerry's son thinking that all Priuses came with Hillary stickers.
Well, I knew he was a conservative, and I purposely wanted to find a conservative to quote at the end of my book because I'm liberal, and I thought that would be appropriate for my whole mission.
He's a great guy. He's a truly kind and decent man.
Well, it's we can't again, you can't assume if with people, you can't always assume if this then that.
Right.
And to embrace our differences while acknowledging them and being willing to disagree without being disagreeable, and like I'm in the executive search business, and when I'm looking at board candidates, that's, whether they can sit on the audit committee or the comp committee, right up there is, can they disagree without being personally disagreeable? Is kind of top of my list. Most clients do. So, well, I want to thank you both for taking the time, and I know lots of smart people who are on point. I know lots of funny people who are perfectly lovely, but you two are both, and that's rare, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie, so much.
Yeah.
And don't forget the one thing that we can all agree on.
That's right. This is Jeanne and I at the end of that dinner where we went to split the bill. We agreed on one of the topics that has divided America for a long time. Is a martini gin or vodka? PJ and Jeanne?
Gin.
We're in violent agreement. This is
violent.
Wonderful. We've really
hearts full of youth, hearts full of truth, 8 parts gin to 1 part vermouth.
Now we can get into the shaken versus stirred debate, but anyway,
we'll have to leave.
That's a whole nother hour.
It's another hour.
Let's stick with what we can agree upon, and hopefully everyone can. We thank you all for coming, and support your local UVA Alumni Association, and we'll be having more panels going forward.
Thanks so much, PJ. Nice to see you.
It's good to see you.
Thanks, Carrie.
Good to see you both.
Thanks.
Good night.